The city rose each morning like a divided soul. On one side, old markets stretched their tired backs under the sun, their wooden stalls heavy with dust, kola nuts, dried fish, and stories older than memory. Women called out prices the same way their mothers had, voices steady and patient. On the other side, glass towers climbed the sky without shame, reflecting wealth, speed, and hunger. Cars screamed past the markets, and men in polished shoes walked quickly, as if afraid the past might touch them. Beneath the noise of progress, tradition still breathed, quiet, watchful, refusing to die. In this city lived a woman who moved like a soft wind. She spoke little, not because she had nothing to say, but because she had learned that loud voices often crushed gentle ones. She came from a village where people greeted the morning before greeting each other, where respect was shown through action, not noise. In her husband's house, her calm ways mocked her as strange. She greeted elders properly, lowered her eyes, and waited her turn. Many mistook her silence for emptiness. "She is too quiet," they said. "A woman like that carries no weight." In a city that praised sharp tongues and bold steps, her stillness made her invisible. Her marriage had carried her into a family known by many and feared by some. Their name opened doors. Their money silenced questions. Yet inside their large home, warmth was rare. She ate where she was told, spoke when spoken to, and learned the rules without anyone explaining them. Her mother-in-law corrected her without raising her voice. Her sisters-in-law smiled without kindness. She was a wife, yes, but more like a visitor who had overstayed her welcome. Sometimes at night she whispered to herself, "I am here, even if they do not see me." When her belly began to grow, hope and fear grew together. The child inside her felt like a fragile light in a room full of shadows. But joy was never spoken freely. Each look she received weighed her down. Motherhood was not celebrated, it was measured. Each month, the pressure tightened around her chest. She heard it in passing words, in heavy silence. "A woman's value is known through her child," an aunt said one evening, stirring soup too hard. Her hands trembled, but she said nothing. The elders visited often. They spoke in low voices, wrapped in proverbs. "A strong tree must bear strong fruit," one elder murmured. Another added, "A house without a son has no roof." No one asked how she felt. No one asked what she prayed for. Her unborn child was already judged, reduced to a single question that decided her fate. At night, she placed her hand on her stomach and whispered, "Come safely, my child. Come whole." Outside, the city hummed, unaware that destiny was already moving its pieces. The husband often stood alone on the balcony at night, staring at the city lights as if they could answer him. His heart pulled him toward his wife, who slept quietly inside, her breathing slow and tired. There was a time he had loved her without fear. But now, love felt small beside the heavy voice of ambition and the watchful eyes of elders. "You are a son of this house," his uncle had told him once. "Do not let feelings make you forget where your blood comes from." He repeated those words like a prayer, yet they brought him no peace. Each choice felt like a knife cutting him in two, one blade for love, the other for legacy. In his family, bloodlines were not spoken of gently. Children were counted like harvest, not cradled like miracles. At family gatherings, elders spoke proudly of names, land, and future power. "A child is the rope that ties tomorrow," the old men said. "Without strong rope, the house will fall." No one spoke of laughter, warmth, or innocence. Compassion was seen as weakness. Even joy bowed before tradition. The husband learned early that legacy mattered more than hearts, and he carried that lesson like a stone in his chest. Yet in the quiet corners of the house, another truth slept. His wife's late parent had lived simply, far from city noise. Few knew of the land bought long ago, the patient investments grown without pride or display. "Money that made no sound attracts no thieves," the elders used to say. This fortune waited in silence, like a seed buried deep, preparing to break the ground at the right time. That night, clouds gathered without warning. Wind howled through the compound, shaking windows and rattling doors. Thunder rolled like ancestral drums beaten in anger. As rain crashed down, the woman cried out in pain. Labor had begun. The city slept, unaware that a life-altering moment had arrived. The husband froze, fear tightening his throat. Somewhere between lightning and shadow, fate knocked loudly, and no one could pretend not to hear. As the storm raged, elders stirred in their sleep, uneasy for reasons they could not name. Dogs howled. Trees bent low. It was said that when ancestors watch closely, the air itself grows heavy. That night, truth shifted beneath the surface, arranging itself patiently. Before the first betrayal was born, destiny had already chosen its path. The hospital roared like a marketplace caught in a sudden storm. Voices rose and collided, nurses calling names, relatives arguing, machines beeping without mercy. The smell of medicine mixed with sweat and fear. Under the harsh white lights, life and death brushed shoulders like strangers passing in a crowded street. Stretchers rushed by, wheels crying against the floor. Somewhere, a baby wailed. Somewhere else, silence fell heavy. In that confusion, truth found a place to hide. No one noticed when it slipped into the cracks, waiting. On a narrow bed, the woman lay trembling. Her body had given all it had to give. Pain washed over her in waves, dragging her toward darkness. Medicine blurred her thoughts, softened her cries, loosened her grip on the world. She tried to speak, to ask questions, but her tongue felt heavy. Faces leaned over her, voices distant, like echoes at the bottom of a well. Decisions were made around her, not with her. Her silence, forced by weakness, opened a door she never meant to unlock. Then a cry filled the air. Sharp. Strong. "It's a baby," a nurse announced, relief and pride in her voice. Family members sighed, some smiled, others nodded as if a box had been checked. "You are blessed," someone said quickly. The words settled like dust after rain, soft, quiet, unquestioned. No one spoke of any other sound. No one mentioned the cries that never reached her ears. A sacred moment, meant to be whole, broke into pieces without noise. Outside the room, the husband stood frozen when the truth reached him. 3 babies. Triplets. The word struck him like thunder. For a heartbeat, joy flared bright and wild. Then fear followed, cold and sharp. His mind raced ahead of his heart. 3 children meant questions. 3 blessings meant danger. He thought of elders, of whispers, of power shifting. What should have felt like a gift began to feel like a heavy load. He pressed his palms together, as if prayer could untangle his thoughts. That night, he did not go home. He was called instead to a quiet room where elders sat with serious faces. Lamps burned low. Shadows danced on the walls. An advisor leaned forward, his voice smooth like oil. "Too much blessing attracts jealous eyes," he said. "The ancestors demand balance." Another elder nodded slowly. "Sometimes," he added, "a sacrifice protects the whole house." The husband swallowed hard. "But they are my children," he whispered. The advisor smiled thinly. "Wisdom is not always gentle," he replied. "What you do now decides the future." Ancient words were twisted that night, shaped to serve fear and ambition. Tradition, once meant to guide, was sharpened into a blade. The husband listened as if trapped. Outside, rain tapped softly on the windows, unaware that a line had been crossed. Somewhere down the corridor, a mother slept, dreaming half-dreams. And in the quiet between heartbeats, betrayal began to take its first breath. That night, the elders spoke as if they were guarding a fire that could burn the whole village. Their voices were low, heavy with fear dressed as wisdom. "When the basket is too full," one elder said, tapping his walking stick on the floor, "it attracts thieves and spirits alike." Another nodded. "Too much fortune invites eyes that do not sleep." The advisor leaned closer to the husband. 3 children at once is not ordinary," he whispered. "The ancestors demand balance. One must be removed so the others may live in peace." The word removed fell softly, but it carried the weight of cruelty. Tradition, once meant to protect life, was bent into a tool of harm. The husband felt his chest tighten, yet he did not stand up. Fear chained his feet. In that moment, blessing was renamed curse, and conscience was told to be silent. Before dawn, while the hospital corridors slept, the husband returned alone. His steps were slow, as if the floor itself resisted him. Inside the nursery, small breaths filled the air like tiny prayers. He stood over the babies, his hands shaking. "I am doing this for the family," he whispered, though no one asked him to explain. "I am doing this so you may live." He lifted one child, wrapping the small body tightly. The baby stirred but did not cry. Tears burned his eyes, yet he turned away. Duty became his shield, protecting him from the truth of what he was becoming. As he walked out, something inside him cracked. The house would still stand, but its moral spine had broken. The child was taken far from the city, beyond familiar roads and remembered faces. Placed in the care of strangers, the baby was given a new name, one that carried no history. No story of birth was told. No lineage spoken. "Do not ask where this child comes from," the caretaker was warned. "The past must stay buried." And so innocence paid the price for adult fear. The child grew surrounded by silence, not knowing that blood called quietly across distance, that truth does not forget its own. Back in the city, the mother woke to her new life holding 2 children. Family members smiled, congratulated her, praised fate. Yet in the quiet moments, when the house finally slept, her heart felt unsettled. She watched the babies breathe, counted their fingers, listened to the rhythm of the room. Something was missing. She did not know what, but she felt it deep in her bones. Sometimes she would wake suddenly, her hand reaching out as if to cradle air. A heaviness followed her joy, an emptiness with no name. "Why does my heart ache when I should be full?" she whispered to the night. No one answered, but her intuition had begun to stir. Like an old drum waking beneath dust, it beat softly, patiently. A mother's spirit had sensed the truth, even when her eyes could not yet see it. The day her name was spoken on every tongue, the city seemed to hold its breath. Radios paused between words. Market women stopped counting money. In tall buildings, men in suits leaned closer to their screens. "The heir has been found," the announcement said. "The fortune is hers. 5.5 billion. The number rolled through streets like thunder. People asked, "Who is she?" and then whispered in disbelief when they realized it was the quiet woman they had never noticed. The invisible had been named, and once named, she could no longer be ignored. As details unfolded, elders nodded slowly. The wealth did not come from noise or sudden luck. It came from land bought when land was cheap, from patience practiced when others rushed, from wisdom passed like a secret. "This is not gambling money," an old man said at the tea stall. "This is ancestral wealth." Through her, the voices of the dead spoke again. The ancestors, long silent, had chosen her as their mouth. What was buried had risen, not to boast, but to correct balance. Inside her husband's home, everything changed overnight. Smiles appeared where cold looks once lived. Greetings grew sweeter, bows deeper. "Our daughter," they called her now. Gifts arrived without request. The same mouths that once judged her silence praised her humility. Power peeled away pretense, showing loyalty's thin skin. She watched quietly, learning who people truly were when gold spoke for them. Her husband smiled too, standing tall beside her, but fear sat heavy in his chest. Each congratulation tightened the rope of his secret. The more her name rose, the louder his guilt screamed. At night, he lay awake, staring at the ceiling. "Stay buried," he begged the truth. But silence had become his prison, and every coin felt like a witness. With wealth came shadows. Old friends watched too closely. Relatives measured her steps. Requests arrived like flies to honey. "Help me," they said. "Remember us." Envy sharpened eyes and tongues. Prosperity, once dreamed of, now carried danger. The family walls began to crack under pressure they did not know how to bear. And in the middle of it all, the woman stood steady, sensing that riches had not come to bring peace, but to shake loose what lies had hidden for too long. The mother sat by the window long after the sun had disappeared, tracing the pattern of rain on the glass. Her mind wandered back to the night of her children's birth, to the hospital's harsh lights and the storm that rattled the city. She remembered the cries, the exhaustion, the way hands moved around her while she could only watch. And then the quiet, the absence that had not belonged there. Doubt crept in where trust had once lived. Could she have been mistaken? Could she have missed something so vast, so essential? The truth pressed against the walls of her silence, like a river trying to carve a canyon through stone. At night, her dreams became restless. She saw 3 fires burning in the darkness, flickering where only 2 children slept. The flames were small, yet they demanded attention, persistent and accusing. Elders' voices whispered in coded phrases, warnings she had half forgotten, riddles from the past she had not fully understood. "The fire never lies," they said, and in sleep she could feel it. Symbols and visions stirred unease she could not dismiss. Something was missing, someone, and the spirit seemed to remind her that absence carries weight. But she no longer reached for confrontation. Her silence became something else, a quiet, watchful strength. She observed her surroundings, noting each word, each gesture, each hesitation. Patience became her weapon, sharper than anger, more enduring than noise. She learned to listen where others spoke, to see where others pretended. Her quiet was no longer weakness, it was preparation. Each day, each cautious glance, each measured step built a power the city had yet to recognize. Years passed. The woman's patience bore fruit. The city, which had once ignored her, now bowed to her presence. Her wealth did not corrupt her, it shaped her. Her mercy made her formidable, her compassion demanded respect. Businessmen who once laughed at her quiet voice now waited for her opinion. Elders who dismissed her in passing offered advice at her table. Her influence spread not through shouting or force, but through wisdom earned in silence, strength tempered by endurance. And then fate moved as it always does, quietly yet inexorably. A child who had been raised in shadows, far from the home of their birth, reappeared through hardship, through injustice, through a series of coincidences that felt like design. The child's eyes mirrored her own, a spark of recognition igniting before words could form. Destiny had threaded their lives together once more. The past, long hidden, now pressed toward revelation. And she knew, deep in her bones, that what was stolen would not remain lost forever. The first time she saw him, her heart hesitated. There was something in the child's eyes, familiar, yet impossible to place. His movements, the way he tilted his head when curious, the quiet patience in his stance, they were shadows of herself, echoes of a rhythm only a mother could feel. She knelt beside him, hand hovering just above his shoulder, afraid to touch too soon. "Who are you, little one?" she whispered. He smiled faintly, a knowing curve that made her breath catch. A mother's intuition stirred fully, like a drumbeat in her chest. Something lost had returned. Whispers began to weave through the neighborhood. Market women glanced with sharp curiosity. Children repeated what they overheard in playful tones. "Isn't that her?" someone said, pointing across the street. The past seemed to rise from the soil of memory, connecting to the present with threads of quiet suspicion. Doubts that had been sleeping now awakened, pressing against walls of propriety. Secrets no longer fit neatly in the dark, they pressed toward the light, and silence began to fracture. Inside the house, the husband paced, heavy steps echoing against polished floors. Lies he had stacked like stones trembled. Every new glance between mother and child chipped at the carefully built walls of his deception. Pride fled his face, fear took its place. He muttered prayers under his breath, but guilt demanded more than whispered words. "I have done wrong," he admitted, though no one could hear. Every lie now weighed him down as if the very air had turned against him. Elders were summoned. Their robes rustled as they took their seats, faces grave beneath the weight of tradition. "Speak truth," the woman said, her voice steady yet unyielding. "The wisdom you claim, the customs you enforce, how many lives have been bent or broken in their name?" The room fell silent, then murmurs rose. Customs meant to guide had been misused, twisted into instruments of control. Even the oldest among them shivered, for ancestral law had eyes and demanded accountability. And then, under the open sun, the revelation came. The 3 children stood before the city, their small hands clasped, their voices joining in a chorus of innocence and power. The crowd gasped. Murmurs became cries. Lies that had stretched for years collapsed under witness and ancestral watch. The stolen child, once hidden, was returned. Truth was no longer a shadow. It shone in full, unbroken, undeniable. The city felt it in its streets, its markets, its very breath. The story of 3 children, of betrayal and endurance, now laid bare for all to see. The husband stood alone in the courtyard, the sun striking his back, but no warmth reached his chest. His mind spun with years of lies, each carefully laid stone now trembling under the weight of truth. Confession called to him like a drumbeat, steady and insistent, while pride and fear clung like chains around his heart. "If I speak," he whispered to the wind, "I lose honor. If I stay silent, I lose my soul." The choice tore at him, and he swayed as though the ground itself had become uncertain. Every breath carried the weight of shame, every heartbeat a warning from ancestors he had long ignored. Across the courtyard, the elders and family watched. Authority, once absolute and unchallenged, began to crumble in silence. No fists rose, no doors were broken, yet the power of lies had been stripped bare. The city could feel it in the air. Patriarchal dominance faltered not by force, but by the relentless pull of truth. Men who once sneered now whispered, and women, long unseen, held space where strength had always been denied. A quiet revolution unfolded without a single blow. She approached her children slowly, eyes soft but unwavering. Each small hand she took brought pieces of a fractured past back together. No anger was raised, no vengeance demanded, only the steady, unshakable love of a mother reclaiming what had always been hers. "You are all mine," she said softly, letting the words seal the bond, "and no one can take that away again." The children nestled close, sensing the power of truth over cruelty, of dignity over fear. Sitting afterward, she closed her eyes and felt the weight of years lift slightly. Money, titles, and wealth had never been her prize. Her endurance had carried her through storms, betrayals, and silence. It was this resilience, born of suffering and patience, that had shaped her into someone the city could not ignore. Tears slid down her cheeks, but they were not for loss. They were for survival, for the strength that had quietly grown within her. Justice arrived not with swords or fire, but quietly, leaving its mark like the slow erosion of a river over stone. The husband faced exposure, ridicule, and the unrelenting gaze of truth. His betrayal would never be forgotten, yet no blood was shed, no graves dug. The scales had been balanced by consequence, not violence, and a moral order returned, subtle but undeniable. In the household, life shifted. Old hierarchies weakened, as respect rooted itself in honesty rather than fear. Walls that had once held silence now echoed with conversation. The children laughed freely, the elders watched thoughtfully, and even the husband learned the cost of deceit. The family structure, forever altered, began the slow work of healing. Truth had spoken, and the home, though scarred, would never again forget the power of being seen, heard, and held accountable. The woman stood in the center of the courtyard, her chest steady, her gaze calm. Around her, the city seemed to hold its breath, waiting for her next move. She had been wounded deeply, betrayed in the most sacred ways, but the bitterness that could have consumed her was left behind at the door. She chose justice instead. "I will not let anger rule me," she said softly, as though speaking to herself, yet the words carried across the walls. Strength, she realized, was not in the loud cries of revenge, but in the quiet decisions guided by wisdom and restraint. The house, once fractured by lies, began to breathe again. Emotional scars were visible, yet acknowledged, like etchings in old wood. She moved gently among her children, touching their shoulders, holding hands, but never rushing the process of repair. "We heal at our own pace," she murmured, eyes meeting each of theirs. Forgiveness was not a gift to be handed over lightly. It was a path walked step by step, with care, patience, and understanding. Pain remained, but it no longer ruled them. The three children, once scattered by deceit and fear, now stood together under the same sun, bound by truth and blood. They looked at each other, and the fragile threads of connection began to knot tightly. Love returned in small, trembling steps, laughter echoing across the courtyard where silence had once reigned. History had left its marks, bruises invisible to the eye, yet felt in the heart, but honesty had rebuilt a family that seemed lost. The husband watched from a distance, alive, yet stripped bare. No violence came to him, but the weight of his betrayal pressed on him as heavily as chains. Pride was gone, replaced by a quiet humility that followed him into every room. Every glance at the reunited children reminded him of what he had done, and the lesson carved itself deep. He would live, but he would never forget. The city itself seemed to lean in, absorbing the story unfolding before it. In marketplaces, in boardrooms, in quiet streets, people spoke softly of endurance, patience, and the power of character over wealth. The woman's silence, once mistaken for weakness, had become a mirror reflecting strength, teaching that true authority comes not from fear or riches, but from integrity and endurance. The lesson spread quietly, as it always does in the lands where ancestors watch and wisdom whispers through the wind. The woman walked slowly through the courtyard, the sun casting long shadows across the stone paths. She paused, her eyes taking in the faces of elders and children alike, sensing the weight of generations upon her shoulders. "Tradition," she murmured, her voice steady, "is not cruelty. Wisdom is not measured by fear, but by how it protects the innocent." She lifted her hands, palms open to the sky, honoring the ancestors whose guidance had always been whispered in wind and fire. The lessons of the past were not discarded, but reframed, truth now standing where blind obedience once ruled. Compassion, she realized, could coexist with reverence, a balance both delicate and eternal. In the quiet hours of the evening, she reflected on the journey that had brought them here. Fate had moved softly, almost unnoticed, yet its footprints were etched deep into the lives it touched. She thought of the child once stolen, the secrets buried, and the lies that had festered in shadows. Nothing, she understood, could remain hidden forever. "Destiny has a patience we cannot rush," she whispered, as the wind rustled through the courtyard trees. Darkness could hide truths for a time, but even shadows bend toward the light. The community, watching from afar, carried the story in their hearts. Around fires, in marketplaces, and beneath the mango trees where children played, the tale of endurance, justice, and maternal strength began to weave itself into memory. Elders nodded knowingly, passing on the warning. Cruelty disguised as tradition brings only shame. Compassion guided by wisdom is a path to lasting honor. The lesson would echo far beyond a single household, carried forward by those who remembered, shaping hearts and choices for generations to come. Justice, they understood, was not fleeting, it was as enduring as the ancestors who watched silently, yet ever present.